Hey, welcome to Painting Desert Rocks with Shondell Joyce. I always do a value sketch and a color study before I do a painting. This helps me to lay out the palette of pastels I'm going to use methodically, working from dark to light. To help you lay out your palette, start first with the darkest dark, which is an indigo blue, which we'll be using for the shadows. Next is a red violet. This is also a dark. I consider these both to be 5 values, so they're pretty dark. Next, we're moving to the 4s. These are not quite as dark. The first 4 is magenta. Magenta is a cooler, lighter version of red violet. It's going to be more for the distance. Next to it is a blue violet, which is more like a ultramarine blue in terms of paint. It's going to be the color in the distance. This moves us to the middle values, or 3s. We have more 3s than we do the darks. So the first one is a pumpkin orange color. So this is intense orange. The same value, but a different color, is like a brick color. This is a little bit lighter, more of a terracotta. It's going to be the same pumpkiny color, but in the distance. And then the third is a blue, an intense blue. This is some distance color. It's a more of a cobalt blue. This moves us to the 2s. The first 2 is yellow orange. This is a highlight color where the sun is hitting the monuments. Next to it is a taupe color, like a very light beige color. This is a color for the roads and a highlight color on the distant butte. And then last on the 2 side is blue-gray. So this blue-gray color is for the canyon floor. This brings us to our lightest lights. The first light is yellow white, so it's a warm white color. It's a highlight color. The next one is a sky color, and it's more of a light orange. I know that's a bold choice for a sky, but trust me. The last is light blue, and it's a distant hill monument color. So there's our palette. Now we're going to work methodically from dark to light. First thing I do is sketch. I've put in the rule of thirds, keeping my areas of interest located at the intersecting points. I'm sketching with the magenta color, which is one of the colors I'll be incorporating into my painting. This happens to be a new pastel in U, and it's a harder pastel. So it's perfect for an underpainting or a sketch. So using the rule of thirds to help me develop the composition, I'm sketching the big shapes of the monuments, putting some of the shapes of the darks and lights. I'm not getting into heavy detail here, just showing myself with the side of the pastel where the big darks will be. This is a hard pastel. All of my soft pastels will go right on top of it, so I'm not worried about it. Now, I'm all set and ready to paint. So starting methodically with my darkest dark, the 5 value, that's the indigo blue. I start blocking in some of the dark, shadowy parts on the monument that's closest to me. So the darkest darks come forward. Darks always come forward in a composition while lights recede. So I want to keep everything in the foreground darker and more intense with color. Everything in the background will be lighter and more muted in color. So keep that as a rule of thumb as you paint. Now that I have my darks in place on the monument in front, I'm going to put in the warm dark, which is the red violet. Now, this is more like a reflected light into the earth that has fallen away from the monument and creates kind of the mound of the base of the monument. It's also a really rich color to help enliven the shadows. I like having warmer and cooler versions of each color in a painting. I think the color temperature adds interest. So now we have the beautiful intense darks in the foreground. I'm going to put my intense darks in the background. These are the 4 value colors on the list. I'm starting off with the blue violet color. I'm using it quite a bit in the background, so the majority of the painting is going to be covered with this color, and I'll probably be painting over it with other colors as I go. I negative space paint around the butte in the foreground, coming right up against the edge. I want that edge to be crisp and clean, and the edges of the butte or the monument in the background to be a little looser, less defined, because they're further away. So another rule of perspective is things that are closer to you are sharper and more clearly defined. They have hard edges. Things that are further away are mistier, less defined, and have soft edges. So keep that as a rule of thumb to describe perspective. Next, I am adding magenta, which is the warmer version of red violet. It's actually a cooler version. It's going into the background. So the magenta is like a red violet that has a little more blue to it. You can see it's 1 step lighter than the red violet I used in the foreground, making it a 4 instead of a 5. If you're not sure what the numbers on the values mean, sign up for my online classes and work with me, and I'll teach you how to work methodically from dark to light. These are the 3s. I'm starting off with the cooler 3. This is a version of orange that has a little bit of blue in it, which sounds bizarre, but it's true. So it's a cooler, softer blue. It's a lighter orange for the intense color on the butte in the background. Now I'm putting this in first so that I can contrast it mightily with the color in the foreground. We've moved to the 3 column in my palette. So the 3 in the background is a little bit lighter than the 3 I'll be using in the foreground. I'm putting it all over. While I have that pastel in my hand, I often think to myself, where else can I use it? And I'm working that color all through the background. It may look warm as we're applying it here because we haven't put anything to counter it in the foreground. So right now you're seeing war between the background and the foreground for dominance. So we'll have to push it back pretty quick. While I have it in my hand, I'm putting a little bit of it in the base and taking some of that intense blue, that's also one of the 3 column colors, and using it in between the 2 buttes. This is for the canyon floor. There's a lot of water vapor that's coming up from the canyon floor, and it's causing some diffraction in the view. Next, I'm putting the intense pumpkin-y orange in the foreground. So now you're starting to see some contrast where the color in the foreground is more intense. You see how intense it is compared to the background color? This is a vibrant, bright orange. And I'm using it to define some of the dirt that's falling away from the monument onto the ground in front of it, building up the base, using it to clearly define the edges of the rocks, and making almost all of the standing rock on the monument very warm and bright. This intense warm color comes forward. Another rule for creating perspective is warmer colors come forward, cooler colors recede. Now we're at the 2 column. So the first 2 is a taupe. The taupe is like a light orange color. I'm using it as a highlight in the monument in the background. So it's helping to describe some of the rocks and helping to push that intense background color to the back so that it doesn't war with the foreground anymore. So the taupe color is the highlight color. It's creating some beautiful definition in those hills. If I happen to go over some of my darks by accident, I take a moment to reinstate them. I don't want to lose any of my darks. The darks, by the way, in the background are that blue color. Coming back to the taupe, I'm using it to define the shapes of that butte, create the texture in the standing rocks. And I'm taking my time with this step. Yes, I know it's speeded up a bit, but I'm taking my time and being very methodical about this background. I don't want to have a huge amount of detail back there, but I do want to make sure that there's enough to contrast and draw the eye. So the taupe helps to create shapes and texture in the rock. The marks I make here are crucial for the texture. So I turn the pastel as I go so the perfect edge is contacting with the support and making the mark I'm looking for. Now you're starting to see some finish to the background here as that monument really takes shape. You're also starting to see some stratification in the layers of the ground leading to the canyon floor. I'm pulling some of that taupe as a transition color into the canyon floor, making it lighter. It's not going to warm up the floor too much because we already have a bunch of blue underneath it. So that's going to make it read cooler, even though taupe traditionally would be a warmer color. Okay, so that is just reasserting some of the darks, making sure they're crisp and the edges are crisp up against the background. I don't want to lose my darks here. The darks are crucial in the foreground. So now that I have those darks in place and they're sharp and clear and clean, I'm going to go back to my 2 column on my palette and choose my next 2, which is a much more vibrant and delicious color for adding some reflected light into this butte in the foreground. So now we're hitting a bluish gray, which is going to separate the 2 canyons. This bluish gray is for the sand that's broken off. Big boulders have tumbled in between those 2 canyons, and that bluish gray is helping to differentiate those 2. As I work it in, I'm putting reflected light on that back canyon with the same bluish gray, creating some lines. And now I'm moving to the warmest color on the 2 line, which is a yellow. It's a yellow-orange. Actually, it's not true yellow. It's more yellow-orange. And I'm using it as a highlight color on the monument where the sun is hitting it, and also on some of the planes of rock that are facing the sun. So this helps give some shape to the monument. I have a harder version of the same color to get lines. If you're ever wondering how to make a straight, clean line with the pastel, use a harder pastel in that same color, or even a pastel pencil, and that'll give you that straight, clean line. I'm creating some pop highlights with that yellow orange. You can see already how the color temperature alone creates that sense of perspective in this painting. It's really starting to pop with the intense, bright, warm colors in the foreground and the muted, cooler, lighter colors in the background. So now we've got most of the big, intense colors on my 2 line, and I'm moving to the 1s. So the first one is a light yellow. As you can see, it's way lighter than the yellow I just used as a highlight color on my butte. And this light yellow is the same highlight color in the background. I don't want it to be as vibrant, so it's a lighter, softer color for the background. And here I'm just touching up my edges a little, making sure they're crisp on the butte. Next color is light blue, and this is, I'm painting over a mistake I made. This light blue is the color of a distant butte that you can see behind the middle ground, so it's way, way background. And I'm going to go ahead and work it in between the two so it creates a sense of aerial perspective. The blue in the middle on the canyon floor also adds some texture and interest, some striations in the rock formations. So just a little more texture for the eye back there, a little more eye candy. That moves us to the next one. Oh, here I'm doing a little touch up, making sure my edges are good and clean. Perfect. Now that the edges are clean, I'm ready to add some of the sky color. Before I put in a sky, I always want to make sure my edges are clean first, because that way I won't mess them up too much when I'm adding the sky. So the next color on my list is the sky color. It's the same as the taupe, but it's one step lighter. It's like a light orange. You can see when I put it right next to the taupe that the taupe is a 2 value, whereas the light orange is a 1 value, showing just a subtle difference between the two up in the sky. So I'm working my way negative space painting the sky around the monuments. If I'm ever unsure about a color, I'll put a little bit of it on the reference photo and try it out. Make sure I'm on the right track before I go. At this point, if you're concerned about pastel particles falling onto your darks, you could flip your surface upside down and paint upside down, and that would keep some of the dust from falling onto your darks. I'm not terribly concerned as I go through. I'm also working that light taupe color into a few other places so that it's creating some color harmony through the whole painting. At this point, I have worked methodically from dark to light, and I've worked through all of my colors that I laid out in the palette, and I am done with the painting. I'll add a few touches here and there and make sure I have the texture I'm looking for. Usually I don't do a painting completely in one sitting. Instead, I'll finish it up to the point where I think it's finished and then forget about it. Come back to it the next day, have a cup of coffee with it, make sure it's finished. There it is. That's my story, and I'm going to stick to it. I may add 1 or 2 more touches here and there. Join me Wednesday night for my weekly online pastel classes on my website.